A quick word then about capacitors. Capacitors in a DC circuit. This is a capacitor. It's known as an electrolytic type of capacitor. We won't worry too much about the bent wires at the end there, but it's a capacitor. It doesn't pass a direct current. It won't pass a DC current, but it will, if it's connected in parallel to the source of a DC current, store DC electricity, rather like a rechargeable battery. Look, let me show you. We'll put the capacitor to one side for a moment. Here's a battery, and here is an LED, a light emitting diode. And if we connect the diode wires to the battery, well, the bulb lights up, the LED emits light. No surprises there. Disconnect the LED from the battery, and the light goes out straight away. Now let's connect the LED to the wires of the capacitor. They're very small wires and I have trouble seeing them, but here we are. Right. Now we're going to place the capacitor in parallel with the battery. Watch what happens to the LED. Well, as soon as we connect to the battery, the bulb stays on, the LED stays on, emitting light. And if I take the battery away, the LED continues to emit light. The LED is taking its energy from the capacitor. The capacitor has charged up and stored the electricity and was then feeding it to the LED. So the capacitor acts like a rechargeable battery. Look, I can recharge it again just by touching it in parallel with the battery. And there we are. Instantly the capacitor is recharged and the LED is emitting light. Gradually gets dimmer as the capacitor discharges. So, capacitors charge and discharge, and if required to, they can do so almost instantly. So, when we place the capacitor in parallel with the bulb, we saw that the brightness of the bulb increased substantially, as did the voltage across the bulb. So what was actually happening? Well, let's go back to the whiteboard. Change pens. The voltage was increasing and then decreasing, and then nothing was getting to the light bulb at all until the next pulse of DC occurred. And that's why the light looked so dim. It was only getting electricity for 50% of the time. But when we placed a capacitor in the circuit, then as the voltage rose, not only did it supply electricity to the light, it also charged up the capacitor. So that during this time when the voltage was falling and no voltage was getting to the bulb at all, the capacitor took up the difference and gradually discharged. So what was happening was, instead of no voltage getting to the bulb, now there was a voltage, and it was coming from the capacitor that was behaving rather like a rechargeable battery. So now, instead of no voltage getting to the bulb from that point to that point, there was a voltage, albeit a slightly reducing voltage as the capacitor discharged. Of course, before the capacitor had discharged, the next half cycle was starting to build up. And as soon as the voltage got to this point here, I don't know exactly what voltage it was, but then the capacitor was starting to be charged again, and the bulb was getting an electric pulse again. And then as we got down the other side, the capacitor started to discharge and continue supplying electricity to the light. I'm trying to think of a number of things at once here whilst drawing and talking and narration at the same time. And so that was the odd shape that we saw on the trace of the oscilloscope, but that also made sure that the bulb burned a lot brighter because it wasn't spending any time without any voltage getting to it. So that is how a capacitor, sometimes called a reservoir capacitor in the old days, these days it's called a smoothing capacitor, assists the production of electricity from a power supply unit. But you may notice we still have a varying voltage on the supply line. If the capacitor was in circuit back here, it would have the voltage would have been coming down, and so we still have a variation in voltage between this peak and that trough, and this peak and that trough, and this is called the ripple voltage. Ripple. The ripple voltage. It's like a ripple on top of the DC voltage. So much then for half-wave rectifiers.